Happy Wednesday to everyone here around the campfire. It looks like it's time for more cozy horror once again, with me, Dr. Plague, your constant and lovable host. Let's get started with today's topic of discussion: strange cures and odd remedies. Let's get started with not really medicine, but something that helps the soul. A support group for those who have lost something that may be hard to find. It's something not quite tangible, but something you miss when it's gone. So, if you wouldn't mind, may I have your attention, please?
When I stepped into the little room, I thought I had come to the wrong place. I have AOADD, Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder. If that sounds made up, it's because it's pretty rare, from what I understand. Most people get ADD when they're kids, but very few of them are diagnosed once they're my age. In fact, it's something like 1% of people, from what I understand. When I was a kid, I was never prone to any of the hyperactivity or attention problems that my peers had. I never needed medication or structure to help me pay attention while I was in class. I did really well in school and did really well in my working life, right up until I was about 34. Then suddenly, I had the hardest time paying attention. I couldn't focus on much of anything, not even for the short term. I would find my mind wandering while I was at work, and eventually, I got fired. I couldn't concentrate long enough on my work to get anything done. I tried to find another job, but anything I managed to get ended the same way. I couldn't even pay attention long enough to flip hamburgers, and my resume was soon in shambles. At home, I struggled to relate to my family. Television shows, sporting events, the day-to-day things no longer held my attention. I was aware of this, aware that I was losing my wife and kids, but I couldn't pay attention to that either. It was like being trapped just behind your eyes and having to watch as you lose everything. After my wife left and took the kids, I decided it might be time to go see a doctor. This was a little different than just the general malaise that I sometimes found with life, and I needed help. My doctor told me about the Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder and prescribed medication and some supplements. He helped me fill out the paperwork and get on disability. The disability paid for my housing. My wife had taken our house in the divorce, and the disability made them go easy on me when it came to child support. I wasn't just a lazy slob, I had a medical condition, and I was trying to overcome it. None of the medication worked, the supplements either, and nothing they suggested seemed to help with my attention problems. After a while, my doctor recommended a support group, and I told him I'd give it a try. When I came to my first session, I wasn't sure that I had made the right call. The meeting room was covered with pictures of a man, hand drawings, and police sketches, all of them with the caption, "Have you seen this man?" I wondered who he was, the whole thing feeling a bit tinfoil hattish, but I had to admit that the man looked a little familiar. I was still staring at him when the organizer called me out, looking up when the man asked if I had AOADD. When I told him I did, he nodded and told me I was in the right place. So I took a seat with the other 5 or 6 people there and decided to give it a try. "So, why don't you tell us about your trigger moment?" "My what?" I asked, not sure what he was talking about. "Your trigger moment. Everyone in the group has one. It's the moment you realize that you had a problem with attention. It'll sound a little weird, but it may surprise you to learn that a lot of our trigger moments are very similar." I thought about it, like really racking my brain, but I couldn't come up with much of anything. My doctor had never said anything about a trigger moment, and this was something new. My attention issues had just kind of happened, and I couldn't think of anything that had caused it. The man leading the meetings, a middle-aged guy with salt and pepper hair, nodded and said that was normal. "Charlie," he said, looking at a bearded guy who was dressed like somebody's dad at an amusement park, "why don't you talk about your trigger moment? Maybe it'll help him figure it out." Charlie nodded, interlocking his fingers as he put them across his lap. I was walking down Main Street when a man suddenly called out to me from a nearby park bench. He asked if I would mind giving him my attention, just like that, and I nodded, saying I would. I figured he just wanted money. Most of the guys that call out to you from park benches want money. But after I agreed to give him my attention, he nodded and just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird, wondered what the hell that had been about, but as I walked, I realized I couldn't focus on the fantasy football team I had been planning. I'd been thinking about the game coming up. I was really big into fantasy football back then, and the team I had put together was doing really well. I had been going over my roster for next week. My team was about to go into the semifinals, and it was weird to realize that the roster would no longer hold my attention. I just kind of wandered around, not really thinking about anything in particular. That's how it started. After that, I couldn't really pay attention to anything. I lost my job, I lost my girlfriend, and now I just kind of float around most of the time. That trigger moment, the moment in time when I met the man, seems to be the only thing I can really concentrate on anymore. I can remember it with crystal clarity, but everything else is like catching water in a sieve. I can think about something for a moment or two, maybe even for as long as a half an hour, but eventually, it's gone. I live out of a van now. You might have seen it when you pulled up to the rec center, and I only have it because the guy took my money and handed me the keys, and I didn't have to sign anything. It's not registered. The cops have ticketed me a dozen times or more, and it's only a matter of time before they take that too, I guess. The group nodded at him like this was the most normal thing they had ever heard, and when they all looked at me expectantly, as if I had my own story to tell, I just shook my head. There was something, though, a tickling in the back of my mind, but nothing yet. "Melissa, why don't you go next?" He never asked a question, never asked people if they wanted to share, and all of his statements were just that. He wasn't asking them if they wanted to put their story out there. He was telling them that it was time to share information. I was working as a waitress at a lunch counter. It was the middle of the day, the lunch rush was in full swing, and I barely even looked at the guy when he came and sat down at the counter. I walked over and asked if I could get him something. He said all he wanted was my attention, just a little attention. When I said he had it, he just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird. The guy had wanted my attention and then he left, but that was how it started. I'm not quite as bad as some of the people in the group. I can still hold on to my attention for about 40% of the time. Sometimes, however, I'll just lose all ability to pay attention to anything. My doctor recommended this group, thinking it might stop it from getting worse, but I think it's as bad as it'll ever get. After all, the man only asked for a little of my attention, not all of it. I stopped her after that, asking if she was serious. She said she was, and I looked at the group organizer with a raised eyebrow. "Are you trying to tell me that these two had their attention stolen by, what, some kind of demon or something?" The organizer shook his head emphatically. "No, not a demon. I don't believe in heaven or hell, but I do believe in this man and what he's doing. I don't know what he is, some highly persuasive psychic, some kind of creature from outside our reality, or just some Orwellian thought criminal who's figured out how to perpetrate the worst crime imaginable. But he is the string that holds everyone together, and he seems to like this area the best." I got up, meaning to leave, but the organizer stopped me with a few words. "You met him too, didn't you?" I had my hand on the door, but his statement had made me think again about where I had seen the man on the poster. "I saw you recognizing him when you came in. Everyone does, but they don't always remember right away. He's sneaky, a very easy-to-miss man. He's so unassuming that you never think twice about giving him your attention. It's just a turn of phrase, after all. 'May I have your attention, please?' But he means it literally. They never realize what they're giving up when they agree to give him their attention. but he knows full well what he's taking. I was still at the door, my hand around the knob. Even though I didn't believe what he was saying, I couldn't deny one thing. I did recognize the man in the picture. I just couldn't remember where. Larry, why don't you tell your story next? You should have a seat and listen. Larry has a real harrowing tale. I took my seat, curiosity getting the better of me, and looked at Larry as he looked at his cheap Walmart shoes instead of the group. Larry reminded me of the dad from The Honeymooners, an older guy in the comfortable overweight of age. His head was bald, except for a scattering of peach fuzz on top, and I noticed there was a long scar on his left arm that he kept covered with the sleeve of his shirt. There was enough sleeve to do the job. He was wearing a sweatshirt even in the unseasonable heat, but he seemed inadvertently to pluck at it. It was as if the scar itched him, and he needed to scratch it. I was a bus driver for the city. I've been a bus driver for 25 years. I knew my job, I knew my route, and if I'd been a little luckier, I was only about 5 years away from a really good retirement. I was taking on afternoon fares, greeting people as they put in their change and coins in the little slot. When he got on, I told him it was $1.50 to ride the bus, and it was change only. He asked me something, and at the time, I thought he had asked if I had a quarter. Sometimes they didn't have enough, and they asked if they could borrow a quarter or a dime. I told him sure, digging around in my pockets to see if I had some change. But when I looked up with a couple of dimes, the guy was gone. I didn't think anything of it, just slapped the change in the box and got on my way. As I drove, however, I found my attention waning. I couldn't really focus on any one particular thing. I was just looking everywhere, having trouble remembering what I'd been doing. I crashed that bus into rush hour traffic, causing one of the biggest accidents in the city's memory at the time. There were no fatalities, thankfully, but there was enough property damage and medical expenses that the city had little choice but to fire me. I got a portion of my retirement, but nowhere near what I would have got after retiring with the full 30. I feel terrible for what I did, but even that seems to be dulled by the fact that I can't seem to pay attention to anything for more than a few minutes. I have to write down these meetings on a whiteboard so I can even remember that I have to go to them at all. If it wasn't for Kay here, calling us on meeting days and coming to pick us up, most of us wouldn't be here at all. Kay, the organizer, looked back at me and seemed to be inviting me to tell my own story. I still couldn't remember all the details, but something was starting to come back as I listened to them tell their stories. I had been going to get coffee for my boss and some of my friends in the office. They had given me their order, and I had gone to Keeger Coffee to get some Joe. I'd been coming back with the cardboard container of coffee, the one for me, balanced in my other hand, when someone had asked if they could have my attention, please. I turned, looking at the guy as he stood on a box with a small crowd gathered around him. It wasn't many, maybe 5 or 6 people, including me, but as he asked the question again, a few of them nodded. I found myself nodding along with them. Kay was right. The question was so harmless that I hadn't thought twice about agreeing to it. It seemed that even a nod was good enough. After 3 or 4 of the people had nodded and stepped in closer, he clapped his hands and stepped down off the box. Then, to the general confusion of the crowd, he simply walked away. Looking at the group again, I realized that one of the people from the crowd was sitting there, and they seemed to have remembered me as well. He was on a street corner, a guy standing on a soapbox. He called for everyone's attention, and a few of us gave it to him. I walked off after he left, not thinking anything of it, but that was when it all started. The guy I'd recognized from the crowd was nodding along, looking around as if to show people that he wasn't crazy. Kay was nodding too, and when he spread his hands out, everyone grasped hands, and I found myself joining them. Kay clearly was no victim of the man, and I wondered what his connection was to all this, as he reaffirmed to all of us that we were okay and that it was going to get better. I'm glad that you remembered the man and the moment you lost your attention to him. When I started this group 3 years ago, with Larry there, I knew there would be others. I want to help, I want to heal, and I want to be here for all of you in your time of need. There were nods, some of them thanking him, but I was still curious as to why. Why? If he hasn't affected you, then why do you care? I said, as all of them looked at me. Kay nodded, having expected this. Though I still have my attention, I can assure you that I too have been affected by this man. My father lost his attention to him, you see, about 25 years ago, when I was just a freshman in high school. My father accidentally gave his attention to this man as he stood at a bus stop a few blocks from here. He told anyone who would listen about the man, who had only asked for his attention, screamed it from his bed in the mental hospital, but no one believed him. No one besides me, that is. I've been looking for evidence for years, something to justify my father's stories. And the more of you that I find, the more evidence I get of the man and his existence. I'm so proud of you, of all of you, for being brave enough to come here today and share your stories. They all started to clap, but I didn't join in. So what do we do now? I asked, as the applause died down. Kay cocked a head at me. What do you mean? I mean, if we know this man is stealing our attention, then why don't we find him and get it back? The others shook their heads, and I realized I probably wasn't the first person to think of that. Kay sat back, shaking his head morosely, and told me to put the idea out of my mind. But why? We can find him. You said he likes to hunt in this area, so why don't we just go after him? Because no one who tries ever finds him, or they never come back. They either fail to find him and go crazy trying to get back what they lost, or they find him and he does something to them. Maybe having their attention gives him some kind of power over them. Maybe he just does something worse to them. No one knows. This group is a safe place, a support group for those who are suffering from what he did to them. I never wanted to see anyone else live the way my father did, strapped to a hospital bed so he wouldn't wander off and hurt himself. I help people who have been hurt by the man, helping them lead a normal life. Well, as normal a life as they can. I feel that it's my sacred duty to help people, to try and get something back after what he's taken from them. But there's no getting back what he's taken. I hope you'll join us in that. There is, after all, safety in numbers. The meeting ended shortly thereafter, and as I said my goodbyes and watched Kay pack up the snacks, I covertly took one of the photos off the wall. I know he said that once I remembered, the memory would be crystal clear, but I didn't want to risk forgetting what this guy looked like. I can't share in Kay's optimism, and I can't stand by and do nothing if this man is the one who has affected my life in such a way. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what happens to me. I'll tattoo it on the back of my hand if I have to, so I can force myself to concentrate anytime I begin to slip. I will find this man, this strange creature who steals what is most important to us, and I will have my attention back, or die trying.
It's so strange, the things the Fae put value in. Be sure you know who you're talking to when you speak to anyone these days. Moving right along, we have a story about an amputee who finds he's got a strange new ghost following him around. Let's hear a story about a phantom limb.
I never understood the term phantom limb before now. I'm no soldier. I didn't lose my arm in a battle or saving someone or doing anything heroic or useful. I lost it due to a series of unlucky events. I was hiking in the woods with some friends, doing some very light rock climbing, and when I slipped, I sliced my arm before the rope caught me. I was more relieved when my legs didn't get broken than I was worried about my arm, so I slapped a bandana on it and kept going. We camped the weekend on the ground, but I put ointment on it and I tried to keep it clean. A friend of mine told me Sunday, as we piled into our cars, that I should keep an eye on the wound. Those red marks look bad, and there's no telling what you could have picked up out here. I told him I'd be careful, and when I got home, I took some Tylenol and put a Band-Aid on it. I was feeling pretty tired, which was understandable since I'd been hiking all weekend. I told myself I'd go to bed and turn the air up a little bit because I was feeling hot. I figured I'd be back to business as usual the next day. Instead, I woke up in the middle of the night with a pounding headache and a high fever. I took more Tylenol, but I just couldn't get back to sleep. I was sweating and headachy, and finally I got up and went to watch TV. I called out of work when 6 o'clock came around, and I only felt worse. I could tell something was wrong, but I thought maybe I'd just picked up a bug or something. It wasn't until I went to wipe the sweat off my forehead that I saw the angry red lines running up my arm. They were worse than they'd been the day before, and I got shakily to my feet and stumbled into the bathroom. I ran myself a bath and scrubbed at the arm, but the cut was looking worse than ever. It was angry and infected, the red lines running towards my shoulder, and after drying off, I decided it might be best to head to the ER. I wasn't sure what was wrong. I'm certainly no doctor, but I knew that wasn't normal. I sat in the ER for about 4 hours, only to find out that the cut on my arm was infected. "We want to keep you for a few days and run some tests," the doctor said. "We're concerned about the fever and the apparent onset of symptoms." 2 days later, I got more bad news. My time in the hospital had been far from beneficial. Whatever I had picked up in the woods had been supplemented by a nasty case of MRSA. While I had laid in a bed, eating hospital food and running my insurance up, I'd been exposed to a pretty nasty strain, and it had my arm redder and sorer than ever. By Friday, they were saying it wasn't affected by the antibiotics. By the following Monday, they were talking about amputation. "It's just spreading too quickly, sir. If we don't remove it, you could be looking at a nasty blood infection pretty soon. And we want to get it before you lose the shoulder, too." The hospital had offered to cover the surgery, probably because my insurance was leaning on them for something I had picked up at the hospital, and I seemed to be out of options. As little as I wanted to learn to live with one arm, I didn't really see any way out of it. I agreed, and by Wednesday, I woke up short an arm. They had pushed it ahead, afraid my condition would get worse, and as I looked down at the place where my healthy arm had been a week ago, I wasn't really sure how I felt about it. They had me on all kinds of things, and at first I thought that was why I was having the dreams. I woke up Thursday night with the strangest feeling in my missing arm that I'd ever felt. It was like I could feel something. Every finger flex, every follicle of hair, the cold feeling of tile under my fingers, and even the pressure of my missing elbow. It was so weird, like when your leg falls asleep, but I don't know. I don't really have a way to describe it. It was like the arm was there, but it wasn't. That in of itself would have been weird enough, but as I lay there in the darkened hospital room, I could hear something coming up the hall. It was a scampering sound, like a rat or a small dog. It wasn't a clicking like claws, but a thumping like something with little feet coming up the hallway. Thump, 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 thump. I just lay there, eyes on the open doorway, as my breathing sped up. What was that sound? Had to be a nurse cart or some kind of equipment, but I couldn't think of what could be making that noise. All I could equate it to again was the feet of a very small animal. Thump, 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 thump. Why would a small animal be in a hospital? Thump, 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 thump. Couldn't be that. One of the nurses would have seen it and put it out. I looked at the clock and saw that it was past midnight. Who would be walking a dog up the corridor this late at... It came into the doorway, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. It was my arm, my hand, all of it. It was standing there in the door, its shadow trailing into the room. It was perched up on its fingers like Thing from the Addams Family, the dark hairs on my arm looking curly in the low light. It didn't have eyes, but I felt it like it was watching me, asking me why I had removed it from my body. The wound was gone. The red veins were gone too, and as I found my breath, I started screaming. I was confused and unsure of what was happening, and as the nurse came running, I tried to explain to them what was going on. I told them what I had seen, even pointed at the doorway where it had been, but she just smiled and patted my shoulder. "It's the meds, dearie. They make people see all kinds of weird things. I can assure you that if there was a detached human arm wandering around, somebody would have seen it." I looked back at the doorway, but it was gone. I suppose it would have had to be, or she would have seen it. I laughed, thinking it was just a nightmare, and told her I was sorry for scaring her. She assured me that it was okay and headed back to the nurse's station, leaving me to snuggle down under my blankets and try to get back to sleep. I was just working down back towards sleep when I heard the drumming of the fingers on my nightstand. I'd pulled the covers over my head, but through the thin hospital coverings I could see a shadow of something sitting on the standing tray beside my bed. It was drumming impatiently, its non-eyes boring into me as I peeked, and I wondered where it had been hiding while the nurse was there. Thump, 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 thump. I could hear each individual finger as it bounced off the wood, hear the crackling of knuckles and the creaking of bones. It was seeing me as I was seeing it, and it seemed angry. What did it want? Did it want to hurt me? Even as I wondered, I could still feel those there or not there feelings in my missing hand. It's weird to feel an arm and a hand that's not there anymore, to feel the fingers drumming and see those fingers drumming across from you. It almost made me feel a little dizzy, like seeing the magic picture in one of those books. Thump, 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 thump. I hunkered under my blanket, the old bastion of protection from the monsters, and wondered how long I'd have to hide here. Was someone going to come in and see the hand as it drummed there? Could they see it? Surely it couldn't be real. I was imagining things. I was having an adverse reaction to the medication or something. I'd wake up and discover that this was all a dream. I'd wake up and find out that all of this had been a dream, and I was still out camping with my friends. I waited to wake up or to have a nurse come in, but the longer the drumming of those phantom fingers went on, the less sure I was that it was a dream. What if I had angered my arm by having it removed? What if this was just my life now? My head was pounding, and I felt like my vision might be blurry. I wasn't well. This couldn't be real, but the longer I lay there trying to convince myself of that, the louder the drumming became. Thump, 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 thump. I was getting frustrated. My teeth were grinding together as the drumming of those fingers grated at me. I couldn't take it much longer. It was just a hand. I still had one of them, and I wasn't going to let it torment me for no reason. I threw the covers back, waiting for it to just vanish once I was giving it my full attention. But it remained substantial. It was a slightly tanned arm, covered in coarse black hair, glaring at me with its lack of eyes. "What?" I growled. "What do you want? Why are you here?" Our staring contest was cut short, however, as the lights came up suddenly, and I heard someone coming in through the front door. "Good morning. How are you feeling this morning?" I turned to see my doctor coming in, and I realized it was no longer gloomy in the hallway. The sun was coming up now, a pink line against the window, and when I glanced back at the nightstand, the hand was gone. "Are you okay?" she asked, putting a hand to my forehead. "You do feel warm. Are you feeling dizzy at all?" She looked into my eyes, but before I could answer, there was a sound like fingertips on glass. Thump, 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 thump. I looked up, and there it was. It was behind the glass, standing on the edge of the windowsill, with nothing below it but pavement. The wind was rustling those arm hairs, but it was the lack of eyes that kept boring holes into me, that drove me to the edge. The doctor jumped when I started screaming, pointing at the window as she called people in to restrain me. I was flailing, pointing at the window and trying to articulate what I was seeing, but they didn't care. The orderlies had my remaining hand in restraints pretty quickly, and they were administering something into my IV to help with my fever. "You're too hot," the doctor was saying, trying to calm me down. You've got a fever. We've got to get your fever down before it does you harm. Just relax. Nothing's going to hurt you. You're in a safe place." I wanted to believe her, but I was just waiting to feel the fingers of that disembodied hand wrap around my neck. The next few days are kind of a blur. I would wake up and find the hand at the foot of my bed. I would wake up and find it on my bedside table. I would wake up and find it gone, but then suddenly it would be right beside me. Whatever they had me on made me very groggy, and it was almost like being under a sleep paralysis demon. I could watch it until I passed back out again, the way the fingers trembled and the knuckles bunched. I could see the look in the area of the forearm that seemed like eyes, and see the desire to throttle me. Those moments made me anxious, but it felt like living in a dream. I didn't dream of waking up and finding that I had two arms. I dreamed of waking up and discovering that I wasn't being haunted by the arm that I'd left behind, one-armed or not. Then I woke up and found I wasn't alone. Someone was sitting with me, reading a book out loud, and when I started coughing, they looked up in surprise. I reached for the water pitcher, but as my stump came out, I remembered that I was down a hand. I let it fall back down, and then I went to reach with my other hand, the only hand I had, but he beat me to it. He'd been slow in getting up, but he had two working hands, and he soon had the cup to my lips, so I could take a long, delicious sip of tepid water. "Easy, buddy. You okay?" I told them that reading would help. People like hearing a friendly voice. I coughed again, looking around frantically as I remembered what had been stalking me. "What's up?" said the man, a youngish guy who looked about 25. "You looking for your family? I don't think anyone came to see you since you got here." "Oops, sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that. That's usually why I sit with people, though, because they need a friendly voice." I was looking around, but when I didn't see the hand, I let out a sigh of relief. "No," I said, my voice rusty. "No, it's okay." He smiled. "Well, that's good at least. You have a bad dream or something?" I lay back against the pillows, the board on the wall telling me that I'd been in and out for almost 3 weeks. Jesus, I had picked up a hell of an infection somewhere. It didn't matter, though. I was just glad to have woken up to something besides the ever-present hand. You wouldn't believe me if I thump, 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 thump. My jaw trembled. It couldn't be. I turned my head slowly, expecting to hear the tendons creak. And there it was. It was sitting on the radiator, drumming its fingers and glaring at me with its non-existent eyes. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream, but when the man turned my head to look at him, I felt little beyond surprise. I find it's better to just ignore them. I'm guessing it's the arm, right? Is it watching you? I nodded before I could stop myself. Yeah. How did you know? He smiled, thumping his leg with the book he'd been reading. Caught one of my own. Lost it in Iraq. I had a grenade hit me in the foot, and luckily I got about 2 steps away before it went off. Lost the foot, most of the knee, but I got to keep my eyes, and I lived. I was shocked. Wait, you can see it too? He made a weird noise and then shook his head. Not yours, but I can see mine in the corner over there. It's weird how they seem to stare without eyes, isn't it? Like, how do they manage that, I wonder? I was overjoyed. This guy could see them too. Could all people who had lost a body part see them like this? How long did it last? I remembered what he had said and wondered if it ever ended. Don't worry, he assured me, taking his seat again. You just get used to it after a while. They never go away, at least none of the guys in my support group have had theirs go away. But you get used to it. I'll get you one of their cards if you like. It's nice to have people who know what you're going through. But why is it still here? I almost begged, desperate for answers. No one really knows. They've been part of us all our lives, so I guess it makes sense for them to stay close. Vets and amputees talk about phantom limb syndrome, but I think it's more than just tingles. When that foot jumps, I feel it jump. I imagine it's the same way for you, too. They're a part of us, and they always will be, I guess. I laid back as he started reading again, letting this knowledge wash over me as the words of the Hobbit wafted over me as well. On the radiator, the hand still drummed its fingers and scowled with its lack of eyes. As I lay there ignoring it, I supposed I might as well take his advice to heart. I supposed I would always be haunted now. Haunted by this phantom limb.
It's odd, the things that wander out of a biohazard bag these days, wouldn't you say? Moving right along, we have a story about a doctor who helps people with ailments of the mind. Oh, but he helps a little more than that, I think. So let's hear a story about Dr. Bailey and how he made my problems go away.
About 6 months ago, I was struggling with a lot of problems. My coworkers weren't exactly treating me the way I felt they should be. My girlfriend wasn't really there for me, and I suspected she was cheating. I was gone most of the day, and then she would go out at night, right before I needed to go to bed, saying she just wanted to see some friends. She'd come home right as dawn was breaking, and then sleep sometimes until I got home from work. Not to mention, despite having a pretty good job, we were perpetually broke. My dad was always on my case about promoting. My friends were always on my case about me being 30 and still living like a 20-year-old. And I just didn't feel very supported. Except for one friend. My friend L. Elle knew what I was going through because he'd been going through it for years himself. He'd been hip deep in depression last year, but he said he knew just who could get me through it. He pulled a business card out of his pocket and slid it across the table to me, his smile a little too inviting as he begged me to flip it over. I expected to find the number of an escort agency or even a suicide prevention hotline, but it was a business card for a therapist. Dr. Bailey of the Bailey Therapy Group. He's the best, Elle said. He just makes all your problems go away. I thought about it for a while and finally decided, what harm could it do? The business card said the first 30 minutes were free, so if I wasn't satisfied, then all I'd lost was half an hour. I called to make sure it was real. Elle did sometimes like to play games, and when the receptionist said that they had an opening on Thursday, I decided to give it a try. His office was modest, the kind of place that probably used to be a dry cleaner, and I came in to find him adjusting couch cushions as he smiled and told me to have a seat. Dr. Bailey was an odd guy. I don't mean like he was eccentric or anything, but most therapists you see in movies wear button-down shirts and slacks. They have ponytails and thick glasses. They wear sensible shoes, and they tell you most of your problems are connected with your parents. Dr. Bailey looks like he might have been a student of Weird Al Yankovic. He wore a colorful shirt in an eye-watering style, a pair of ripped blue jeans, and shoes that looked like they might have started out life in a clown car. He had a thick set of mutton chops, a white guy afro, and reading glasses that he constantly kept on the bridge of his nose. The guy couldn't have hidden in a Jackson Pollock painting, but something about his smile put me at ease as he asked me what he could help me with. I don't know, I told him honestly. I guess there's a lot of depression at play. Maybe I feel a little worthless, and people think what I need is to come and talk to someone like you. Dr. Bailey told me to sit down, and that was a fine place to start. Why don't you start by telling me what brings you to this feeling of worthlessness? What really fuels the idea that you have no worth? I guess it all starts with my job, Doc, I said, taking a seat on the couch and getting comfortable. That's a good place. What do you do for work? I work in an IT department at a big logistics company. My coworkers think that I'm just some computer pusher, some guy that plugs in computers and unplugs the internet. I don't think any of them realize what I actually do for the company. One of them in particular has really started busting my balls about server speeds and download times. Does this coworker have a name? I paused, feeling a little weird about just divulging someone's name to someone I just met, but Dr. Bailey was a therapist, and that was part of the job, right? Rich, I answered. Richard Emanuel, the king of the third floor, because he handles all the top clients. His uncle founded the company, and it seems to be mostly run on nepotism these days. Rich has about 5 guys under him that basically just clean up his messes all day. When it comes time for reviews, however, Rich is always the one to get the pats on the back. He's the one who takes credit for everybody else's work, including mine sometimes. I ended up talking about Rich for most of the first hour, and when I was done, Dr. Bailey asked if I felt any better. I found that I actually did. It made me feel a lot better to talk about it, and I thanked him and agreed to set up another session. Walking out of that office made me feel light, made me feel good, and I found myself looking forward to the next session in 2 weeks. That good feeling persisted into the next day. When I arrived to find people talking in hushed voices, I was curious to see what was going on. It seemed that Rich hadn't showed up this morning, which wasn't odd, but he had a big presentation that they had needed him to get out in front of. No one was quite sure where he was. They had called his house. They had gone to the country club where he sometimes played golf early in the morning. They had gone to any number of women's houses who he had claimed to be intimate with, but no one could find him. His uncle was getting a little worried, but tried to smooth it over by saying this wasn't uncommon for Rich. "He'll turn up in a few days," Mr. Morgan said, but I could tell from looking at him that he probably didn't believe what he was saying. When I went to my next appointment with Dr. Bailey, Rich still hadn't turned up. I know some people at the office were worried about him, but I had honestly had the best 2 weeks of my life. Rich had been really writing me about download speeds on the server. God only knew why. And it was nice not to have him in my office every hour or so to ask if I had done something about it. Rich was another one who liked to bypass the firewall as well, so not having to clean up daily after him was kind of a plus. I suppose I was a little bit worried about him, but not enough to go out pounding the pavement looking for him. Dr. Bailey must have noticed because he mentioned that I looked happier. Well, it's the strangest thing. Do you remember the guy I told you about last week? The one who was bothering you at work? Rich. Yeah, he just sort of stopped coming to work. Nobody has seen him, and he simply hasn't shown up for 2 weeks. I don't want to say I'm glad he's gone, but it's been a lot nicer without him. I see. And how has that helped your mental state? I lay there for a minute, thinking about how to answer. Being rid of Rich was nice, but it wasn't the only thing on my mind. Now that work was back on track, I had more time to focus on problems at home. My girlfriend, we'll call her Kay, had really been on it lately. It was always about money with her, and it seemed like I never made enough of it. Kay wanted me to propose to her. She made that pretty clear, but she doesn't want any old ring, and certainly nothing I could afford. She wants something gaudy and expensive, and it's just a little bit out of my price range these days. I conveyed this to Dr. Bailey, and he nodded and scribbled on a pad of paper before asking me questions about our relationship. How long had we been seeing each other, what Kay did for work, what she brought to the household, and whether or not she was helping me with my mental journey. It was pretty eye-opening, really made me think about the relationship a little different. And when he told me my hour was up, I was feeling like I might have some strategies to help fix what was wrong. It was probably not going to happen. I was too much of a coward to enact any of it, but it was nice to have them nonetheless. I got a text from Kay as I was leaving the therapist office, telling me that she was working late and was probably going to miss dinner. I decided to do a little something for myself and got takeout instead. I got some of that really good Chinese food from the place I like near my house, put my favorite show on Netflix, which Kay usually doesn't want to watch, and had a nice night just sitting on the couch, eating and watching something that made me happy. I fell asleep right there on the sofa with a little bit of beef and broccoli in the corner of my mouth, and it was a wonder I didn't choke to death in my sleep. When I woke up the next morning to find that Kay still wasn't home, I looked around the apartment for signs of her. Her keys and her purse were missing, though. I got a little freaked out and started calling her friends, her parents, anyone to see if she had crashed with one of them last night. Sometimes, when she works late, she crashes with different people, and these frantic mornings of trying to seek her out really aren't that uncommon. No one had seen her, though. I even called her work, and they said as far as they knew, she had gone home last night, and her car wasn't even in the lot. I called the police after that, not really having a lot of options, and then I settled in to see if I could figure anything out. In the end, I just got dressed and went to work, same as I did every day. 2 weeks later, as I went to my next appointment with Dr. Bailey, there was still no sign of Kay, and some of the pep was definitely out of my step. "You certainly don't seem as happy as you did last time," Dr. Bailey said, as I sat down on the couch. "No, something happened to my girlfriend." The one I had been talking about last session is what I didn't say. It was something that I hadn't really thought about, but there was still no sign of Rich, and now Kay had gone missing. They hadn't known each other, so I couldn't exactly call it a coincidence, but the coincidence here was that I'd told Dr. Bailey about them. I shook it off, though. I was just being paranoid. This whole thing with Kay had my head spinning, and I just needed some grounding, and good old Dr. Bailey was going to get me through it, hopefully. Well, if you don't mind me saying so, it sounds like some of the stressful things in your life are starting to migrate elsewhere. Maybe that's for the best. You had said that these people were a large part of your mental health struggles, so maybe they shouldn't be there. Have you felt stressed by your girlfriend's actions in the last 2 weeks? Started to get a little angry, but he wasn't wrong. Actually, things have been a little less hectic around the house. Kay's parents came and got most of her stuff, and I haven't had to fight with her about chores or bills or anything lately. No one has hit me up for money in almost 2 weeks, and I haven't had to clean up a mess in the bathroom after she got ready for girls' night either. I've been sleeping a lot better without her constantly tossing and turning all night, too. It sounds terrible, I know, but yeah, I guess things have been a little better. Good, good, Dr. Bailey said. It sounds like we're making some real progress here. Let's move on to other outlying stressors. Is there anything else in your life that brings you stress? I was gonna say that there really wasn't a lot of stress left in my life. But then I remembered the conversation I'd had this morning with my dad. My dad had called me at 6 a.m., like he so often does, and had been flabbergasted at the idea that I was still asleep. Dad's been retired for about 5 years, and in that 5 years, he had forgotten that people work, that offices keep business hours, and that people like to stay up past 8 o'clock at night and sleep past 5 in the morning. It was a conversation that we'd had many times, but this time, Dad decided to get a little personal, and I really didn't appreciate it. No wonder your girlfriend left you. You sleep all day, and then you go to work and play with computers. Who wants a man like that? The worst part was that I couldn't even deny it. I just said, and mumbled my way through my conversation with him until he got tired and hung up. I loved my dad, but he was certainly a big stressor in my life, and I told Dr. Bailey so. He thinks he knows everything. He doesn't speak to anyone. He just talks at them. He doesn't want a conversation. He just wants someone to tell him he's right. It's maddening. I don't know why he calls me every day just to yap at me, like some little dog that sits at the door and barks. Oh, but God forbid you don't pick up the phone, because then he's going to leave you a passive-aggressive voicemail telling you how he doesn't have many more years left and you should talk to him while you can. Maybe I would want to talk to him if he actually took an interest in anything I have an interest in. I know he doesn't like that I work in IT, but I'm paying my bills. I don't ask him for money like my brother does all the time. I think I'm doing pretty well, and I wish he could see that. Dr. Bailey said little beyond making agreeable noises and scratching things on a notepad. It honestly felt great to talk to somebody about my dad. It was something I'd tried not to think about for the longest time, and finally letting go and telling someone how I felt about it gave me a confidence boost like nothing I'd ever seen. I made a mental note to call my dad and tell him exactly how I felt. I thanked Dr. Bailey for his help and made an appointment for another session in 2 weeks. I was feeling on top of the world, really putting in the work, and I decided to call Dad and hash it out with him before I lost my nerve. But when I called my parents' house, my mom told me that Dad wasn't around. He and your uncle went to the lake for their monthly fishing trip. You know how they are about that. It's the only thing he sets a clock by anymore. I doubt you'll get him out there. The reception's terrible, but if it's important, you can tell me and I'll pass it along to him. I told Mom I'd just talk to him when he came back into town and to tell him to call me. She said that she would, and we said our goodbyes. I felt a little bad. I'd really wanted to talk to Dad before I thought better of it, but I knew he'd be back by Sunday, so I could talk to him then. Sunday night, Mom called me again, and she said she was worried about my dad and Uncle Rick. He's always back before dinner time on Sunday. I'm getting really worried. He's never stayed out this late on one of these fishing trips. I told her they probably just had some car trouble and they couldn't get a hold of anybody because they were out in the woods. I told her that if he wasn't back by morning time, I'd call out of work and go out to the little fishing shack they had out there and check on him myself. That seemed to make her feel a little better, and she thanked me before hanging up. Well, the next morning, he still wasn't back, so I called work and told him I was taking a personal day so that I could go check on something. I drove out to the fishing camp, which was what we had called it ever since I was little, but there was no sign of Dad or Uncle Rick. I couldn't believe that they would drive home and not tell Mom, but as I drove back up and down the road looking for sign of them, I began to think a little harder about the events of the past month and a half. I told Dr. Bailey about Rich, and then he went missing. Told Dr. Bailey about Kay, and then suddenly she went missing. Told Dr. Bailey about Dad, and then suddenly he was gone. These were things I should have been putting together all along, but it felt nice to have that kind of confidence, the kind of confidence I had after sessions. And I suppose I overlooked it. I was someone who wasn't used to having confidence, so I guess maybe that made it easier to look past. It's a piss-poor excuse, but it's mine, and I'll hang on to it, thanks. I didn't really think my therapist had anything to do with their disappearances anyway. Dr. Bailey was a little guy, not particularly intimidating, and it would have taken a lot of effort to disappear 3 fully grown people. The longer I drove up and down that stretch of road between my parents' house and the fishing shack, looking for signs that they'd had an accident, the less sure of that fact I became. Instead of calling Dr. Bailey, though, I called L, the one who had started all of this, and asked him to meet me at my apartment. He'd been Dr. Bailey's patient for longer than I had, so maybe he could put my mind at ease. Maybe he could tell me something that would help me put this in perspective and not feel so damn crazy. He said he'd come over that afternoon, and when he did, he looked at me with something like foreboding. Foreboding, but also pity. I've got to ask, how has Dr. Bailey helped you? He sat down on my couch like he'd been expecting this. He's helped me with my depression, self-confidence, and given me some perspective on people in my life. What kind of perspective? I asked hesitantly. He's helped me see that I'm better off without some of these people, and he's helped me cut them loose so that my mental health can improve without them. Did you cut them loose? Or did Dr. Bailey? He turned his head to look at me, giving me that same creepy smile as before. Is that what happened to Kay? I nodded. Yeah, I think he had something to do with it, but I'm not sure how Dr. Bailey is doing this. He's kind of a dweeb. The idea of him getting rid of 3 people is laughable. Laughable, but not very funny. He's only gotten rid of 2 people for me, but the guy who told me about Dr. Bailey said he had gotten rid of nearly a dozen for him when we had a similar conversation. I felt my anger rising. So you knew that would happen? I did. I also knew that someone was giving you trouble at work. I also knew that Kay was bleeding you dry and stringing you along. I assumed that they were the main culprits who were hurting your mental health, and I figured Dr. Bailey would do some good. I sighed as I sat down on the couch beside him. It would have been fine if he stopped with that, but he's got my dad, too, and maybe my Uncle Rick. I didn't intend for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt people. I just wanted to feel better. He patted my shoulder. That's what he does. He makes people feel better. He got a guy at my work who was bullying me. Real high school shit. And then he made him go away. I felt like a brand new man. I hadn't intended to tell him about my sister, the one who's in grad school, been there for like 8 years now and refuses to do anything with it, but it just came spilling out. I talked about how she was the golden child, how she got everything she wanted, and how she had taken my college fund when my parents thought she needed it more. I was so mad at her, and when she disappeared, I really felt it for the first time. I didn't feel that wave of confidence or those good feelings that I had when my bully had been taken away. I was distraught. My parents were upset because their child was gone, but that was when I realized what I had done. I asked Dr. Bailey if he had made my sister disappear, and all he did was smile. He smiled for nearly 20 minutes, and then he asked if I wanted to schedule another session. I did. Despite how I felt about him, I did. I've been continuing to go for the last year and a half, but I'm very careful about who I talk about. It makes me look at my relationships a lot differently. It makes me interact with people a lot differently. It'll affect you too, whether you continue to go to him or not. I've been sitting on my couch ever since he left and staring at the appointment card in my hand. Dr. Bailey has really helped me improve. He's made me a whole new man, but I'm not sure I can get past the knowledge of what he's done. Here's the other part, the part that really scares me. I called my insurance company to make sure there weren't any weird charges that might point to him charging me for body disposal or making people go away. I don't know what I was expecting, but my insurance seemed surprised that I was asking about therapy. They had never been billed by a therapist. They had never been billed by anyone named Dr. Bailey. And I'd just been going for free therapy for the last month and a half. I don't know if I should go back or not, but my friend was right about one thing. Knowing that Dr. Bailey could disappear anyone for the slightest reason makes me really question my friendships. Words have power, something we all know, but we take that for granted sometimes. Be careful what you talk about when you're lying on the couch. You never know when you'll find a Dr. Bailey of your own.
Some days I'm just not sure who I'd rather make an appointment with. Dr. Bailey or Dr. Winters. Moving right along, we have a story about someone seeking a little bit of comfort. Someone seeking an end to their pain. So let's hear a story about cold comfort.
Well, Miss Lee, this treatment is experimental, but we feel it will improve your condition. All you need to do is sign on the dotted line, and we can schedule you for the first of the week. The doctor tapped the form like a used car salesman trying to sell a sports car with no engine. The kind of salesman who thinks you're too stupid to look under the hood and too desperate to believe the deal is anything but genuine. That was the beginning of the end of my life. My name is Pandora Lee, and this is my story. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a debilitating bone disease, the kind that causes your bones to be very weak. My doctor sent me to a specialist, and after running some tests and running up a small fortune in bills, he wanted to try an experimental treatment to harden my bones. I was hesitant. Who wouldn't be? But could I really afford to be in my condition? The following week, I arrived for my first treatment. The waiting room was the same bland area I'd seen 1,000 times. The sort of forgettable facade that hides the work that goes on beyond that unassuming blue door between the show floor and the butcher's shop. Children moved beads along a wire maze as parents and patients looked through magazines that had been current about 10 years ago. The smiling face of President Obama looked up from a table, he and Martha Stewart sharing space with Better Homes and Gardens and Highlights magazine. The magazines were only slightly more interesting than the paperwork on the clipboard I was muddling through, but I tried my best to ignore them. "Miss Lee, we're ready for you," a young blonde-haired woman in scrubs called to me, smiling brightly as she led me through the oddly dark blue door and into a hallway of the same color. Despite the buzzing overhead lights, the paint scheme made the whole place look shadowy, and I shuddered as she led me to a little room farther down. She showed me to a small, sterile room, with only a gurney and an IV stand to break up the emptiness. The room was blessedly brighter, a kind of eggshell white that verged on eye-watering, and I stepped inside and handed her the clipboard. "Please take a seat and get comfortable, Miss Lee. The doctor will be here very shortly." As I lay there waiting, the clean white paper crinkling under me, I had a gut feeling that this was a bad idea. I chalked it up to nerves, though. It was just another exam, just another series of tests, just another meeting that would end predictably. I should have listened to my gut. As the doctor walked in, he smiled his best Crest Kid smile, and I imagined I could see spit stains on his teeth. I wish I could tell you that he was an ugly little man, some goblin who scared me or made me wish a nurse had stayed to observe our interactions, but he was actually very plain-looking. Thinking back now, I can't tell you anything about him, other than his big grin and his neat little mustache. It might have been easier if he were a monster, but I guess life is rarely easy. "Well, Miss Lee, as you know, this is still experimental. It's in the early trial phases. You'd honestly be one of our first human trials for the treatment, but we feel you are the perfect candidate." I stared at him blankly, unsure whether he expected me to be flattered or break out into applause. He looked uncomfortable, clearly not getting the response he was expecting. Calling the pretty blonde nurse from earlier, he asked her to strap me down and told me to relax. The straps were scratchy, the clasps sitting cold against my arm, and I found it hard not to squirm as she slid the IV in. The doctor reached into the hall and wheeled out a large metal canister. It looked like a fire extinguisher, the old kind with a hand crank, except for the face mask on the end, which is undoubtedly going over my face. He must have noticed my apprehension, because the too big grin made a return appearance. "Don't worry, Miss Lee. It's all very safe." He placed the mask over my face, the smell of cleaner mixing with something sickly sweet and acidic. "Breathe deep," he prompted, and I took my first breath, his voice sounding as if it were coming to me from the lip of a deep hole. "You'll wake up in no time." Then it all went black, my last memory being the stuff I breathed in tasting like the smell of cleaner my mother had always used when I was young. Then I didn't think about anything for a while. I was floating for a while, my body as light as a feather, and I could have gladly floated in that void forever. When I dropped back into my body, however, it was worse than any falling dream I'd ever had. I opened my eyes and looked around frantically, my body still splayed across the gurney as the canister pumped whatever was in the tank into my lungs. I felt a surge of pain rip through my whole body, and I jerked fitfully against the restraints. The scream ripped up my lungs, the gas clouding my mouth as I choked on my anguish. The nurse ran in, trying to calm me to no avail. "Calm down, Miss Lee. We don't want you to damage your bones while the treatment is doing its job. The pain is only temporary. The doctor will be in to give you something for it and explain everything." Her words did nothing for the pain that drilled into my bones, and after what seemed like hours, the doctor finally came in. He had a needle in his hand. The tip slid easily into the IV, and he filled the saline bag with something. It was cold, the liquid flowing in like ice, but the relief was immediate. I lay back gasping, the sudden lack of pain almost as jarring as the pain had been, and the big smile hovered over me like a specter. "The first treatment is always the most painful, but it seems to be a success so far. You might have some joint stiffness for a few days, but that's to be expected, as the treatment hardens your bones. As the gas hissed and the ice brought sweet relief to my inflamed bones, I lay there drinking in grateful lungs of air. The lack of pain was hard to quantify, but I became aware over time that it wasn't just the sudden burning that had gone away. The everyday pain I had gotten used to, the inflamed joints and the deep ache of weakened bones, was also gone. It was like someone had flipped a switch in me, and suddenly I was exactly like I'd been before. This may seem like a small thing, but when you've lived with the pain, made it a day-to-day part of your life, its absence is like a physical loss. It was like a kid who's had his tooth pulled, his tongue prodding at the vacancy where something solid had been before. When he spoke, I had to shake myself back to reality to ask him to repeat himself. "We will see you in 2 weeks for your next treatment. The nurse will give you a prescription when you leave. Take it twice a day in order to keep your body from rejecting the treatment. Understand?" I nodded, still a little dazed, and agreed to take the pills. I made another appointment with the similarly pretty brunette and took the nondescript little bag she handed me. She smiled, saying they would see me in 2 weeks, and I headed home. As I drove home, I expected the pain to rear its head again with every press of a pedal or turn of the wheel. The pain had become like a swarm of gnats, ever present and buzzing. You never got used to it, but you became accustomed to it. It's never comfortable, but you look forward to the times when it isn't there. Now, it was just gone. I was driving with nary a pain or a wince, something I hadn't done in years. I should have been happy, but I kept waiting for it to disappear. Maybe that made me a pessimist, but I don't care. When you live like this long enough, you constantly wait for the other shoe to drop. I walked into my house, my bones still feeling like nothing so much as normal bones, and took the pills out of the bag. Reading over the label for side effects or warnings, I found nothing but the instructions on the outside. No name, no ingredients, no warnings, just 8 words in bold font. Take 1 pill, with food, twice a day. I opened the bottle and let a few of the pills roll onto my palm. They were white and blue gel capsules, the contents looking like nothing so much as the sugar on top of the snow caps my husband ate at the movies. As they sat in my hand, I noticed that they were oddly cold to the touch, and the feeling reminded me of the way the liquid had felt as it entered my IV. When they didn't immediately appear dangerous or try to bite me, I let them tumble back into the bottle and closed the lid. I set a reminder on my phone for 7 a.m. and started fixing dinner. When I went to bed that night, I had already forgotten about them, but as I pulled the blankets up around myself, I felt a sudden chill arrow through me. It should have raised a sort of red flag, but I was still riding the high of moving about my home without any of the pain from earlier that day. A few hours later, though, I was awoken by an icy chill going through my body, followed by an intense ache in my joints. As I tried to get up, I felt every bone in my body tighten. It was almost impossible to walk, but after a few minutes, it eased up, and I was able to make it to the bathroom. I figured this was just a side effect of the stiffness the doctor was talking about. And after a warm bath, some of the pain had abated. With some of my mobility returned, I shuffled back to bed, hoping to sleep off the pain until it was time for my first dose of medication. The next day, the pain of the night before was a fleeting memory, and I took my first pill and started getting ready for my day. It usually took me several hours to get my legs to cooperate enough to make breakfast, but today I moved about my kitchen the way I hadn't in years. My joints felt fluid, my bones were as forgettable as they should be, and when I woke my husband up for work at 10, he looked at me a little shocked to find breakfast already on the table, and the kitchen dishes cleaned and put away. "Wow, those treatments really did the trick," he said, taking my hands in his big calloused ones, intent on kissing them. He dropped them in surprise as a shudder ran through him. "Geez, babe, your hands are so cold." There was worry on his face, but I waved his worries away and told him it was nothing. "It's just a side effect of the treatment. I'm fine, sweetie." Deep down, though, I was worried. I should have called the doctor's office right then and there and told them about the side effects. After the weirdness that had happened the night before, I should have been more concerned. But it all comes back to one thing. Despite the stiffness, despite the cold hands, despite the next 2 weeks where sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night and hobbled into a warm bath, the intense pain in my bones was all but a distant memory. I would have given anything to be done with the pain like that, and it turned out the cost was more than I could have known. 2 weeks later, I arrived at my next appointment. I was curious to see if it hurt the same way it had the time before, but my reasons for going were twofold. I had taken the last of my pills that morning, and I knew that I would need more if I wanted to maintain this lack of joint pain. So I smiled at the nurse, let them strap me down again, let them slide the needle into my arm, and breathed in the gas like the good doctor told me to. The treatment was performed the same as the first, but I gritted my teeth through the pain as I waited for him to inject my IV with that sweet, icy liquid as the gas did its work. As the straps slid off, I nodded through the closing instructions and shuffled up to the desk to make my appointment and get my pills. I moved as if in a dream, my body feeling strangely heavy as I climbed into my car and drove home. I jerked awake in my driveway, unsure how I had arrived home. I had never fallen asleep at the wheel, much less sleep drove home, and the thought made me shiver. I grabbed my prescription and headed inside, wanting to get as far from the vehicle as possible at that moment. I thought about starting dinner as I trudged in, but decided to take a nap instead. It was early still, only mid-afternoon, but I was suddenly exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open, and as I slid into bed, wearing the same clothes I'd left the house in, I thought I was settling in for nothing but a couple hours of rest. 10 hours later, I shuddered awake into total darkness as an arctic chill shot through my nerve endings. It was worse than it had ever been, worse than any time before it, and as I tried to climb out of bed, my legs froze up and sent me spilling to the floor. I lay there, unable to bend my legs or arms, only able to pull them towards me like palsied claws. I was overjoyed when I heard my husband's soft snores from the bed beside me. He would help me. He would get me to the hospital. He could get me into a warm bath, and I opened my mouth to scream his name. My lips trembled as I prepared to cry out for him, but no sound escaped my chilly maw. I gasped weakly, his name lost amongst the short barks of sound, while he slept peacefully a few feet away. I lay there with tears of fear dripping down my face, certain that he would wake up the next morning to find me dead. I almost expected to see them freeze against my cheeks, but they did little more than pool beneath my head and wet the side of my face. I spent that night drifting in and out of my new painful existence. It felt like I lay there for weeks, listening to the content snores of my spouse as my body was racked with freezing chills. I thought I would die again and again, and as the sun began to rise, I almost wished for it. The colder I became, the less the shivers seemed to blow through me. I still felt them, but my body had stopped responding. I was powerless to move, incapable of doing much besides watching the sunrise and the day begin. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when my husband yelled my name, my eyes were startled open. What the hell is this? But he seemed to lose his words as he stood over me. I mouthed at him, asking him to help me, but he looked unsure. I don't know how. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but instead he turned to my vanity and fetched a small hand mirror. I looked back at myself, not sure it was me for a moment. I was looking at a perfect china doll as she lay curled up on the floor. Her skin was a perfect alabaster, broken only by the slight spider cracks that ran through it. As I watched, another chill coursed through me, and I saw the cracks lengthen as my fragile form tried to shiver. I wanted to cry, but I had no tears left. Instead, I told him to put the phone next to me and put it on text-to-speech. I wanted him to understand, wanted to explain how this had happened, while I could still explain anything. He did as I asked, saying he would go get help, but I don't think he'll be back in time. It took a surprisingly short time to lay it all out, but I can feel the change beginning to affect my face now. My blinks are becoming slower and slower, and my throat's beginning to tighten as it stiffens like my skin. My lips have started to flake as I speak. the cracks in my arms likely running through the lips my husband loved to kiss. I'll be nothing but a beautiful statue soon, a curiosity piece for people to speculate over. But with the time I have left, I want people to understand how I came to this point. I don't know if it was the treatment or the pills, maybe it was both, but it doesn't appear to be ready for human trials. If they ask you to sign your life away as I did, make sure you know what you're agreeing to. The short respite from pain wasn't worth the hell I found myself in now. It's getting hard to breathe now. My lungs are laboring to pull in breath, and I can feel the same shivering running through them with every gasping pull. My eyes are fixed forward, my fingers forever locked together, and I feel that every word may be my last. If you make it home, Jason, know that I love you, and I'm sorry that this is where we must part.
One more story for you, and I promise I've saved something pretty good for last. Our last story is about a man trapped in the hospital who sees a little more after an accident than he might be prepared for. So let's learn about sleeping with one eye open. Tonight, Dr. Plague reads, Sleeping with One Eye Open. Enjoy.
It was an accident. It could have happened to anyone, which makes me wonder why it had to happen to me. I've worked construction for years. I've never so much as gotten a deep cut or broke a bone. Bruises sometimes, minor cuts. Nothing that stopped me from coming in the next day, though. It was just a typical day, really. I was performing an inspection, chatting with a buddy on a side job, and listening to the sound of an active construction site as it thrummed around me. Insurance would try to prove that I hadn't been wearing my safety gear, but I had witnesses that could attest that I'd been wearing my goggles, my hard hat, and my OSHA-approved gear when it happened. The drug test they had submitted me to showed I had nothing stronger in my system than the bagel I'd had for breakfast. It wasn't the fault of anyone besides whoever attached the rebar to that girder, I suppose. Even then, it wasn't really the welder's fault. It had simply come loose and stood there, waiting for me to get careless. On that day, I turned suddenly as I was inspecting an area of the basement, when a jutting piece of rebar, which I had made note of 1,000 times, pierced my safety goggles and stabbed right into my left eye. The members of my crew found me on the floor of the basement as I started to scream. The piece of rebar had gone through my goggles due to a slight fracture in the lens. That, plus my forward momentum, had caused the lens to break and my eye to be punctured. The rebar, as it happens, had been covered in dust. The dust caused the cut to become infected with a virulent strain of bacteria and ultimately required the removal of my eye. I tell you all this to explain how I came to be in a hospital bed, minus an eye, and strapped to the bed as soon as I finish writing this, since they fear I might be a danger to myself. But that's getting a little ahead of the story, I guess. It started the first night after I lost my eye. I'd been rushed to the ER right away, and the prognosis had been bad almost at once. There was definitely damage. There was the virulent strain of bacteria in the wound that was reacting badly. It was decided that it would be best if the eye was removed immediately to save the rest of my face. They were keeping me overnight to monitor the wound, make sure they got all the bacteria out, make sure the wound was healing properly as well. I remember laying there before I drifted off, trying to come to terms with my new vision and wondering how different my life would be with only one eye. When I drifted off, I was suddenly greeted by something terrible. I was looking through a single eye, staring up at a red, unbroken sky the color of old flames. Long runners of fire, falling stars they looked like, were cascading down, and I could hear a thundering as my point of view shook with the near-constant vibration. I was low, making me think I was less than an inch tall, and though I could look around, I couldn't move. Things were moving around me, though, creatures of perverted geometry. They lumbered about as though every step pained them greatly. As I watched them, something long and spidery, like a needle with wings, descended on me, its long proboscis growing as it landed astride my point of view. As the needle came down towards me, I woke up screaming. The nurses tried to calm me down, telling me I had just had a nightmare, and I tried to drift back off to sleep, visions of that smoldering place still in my head. The next time I closed my eyes, I was staring up at that crimson sky again. The fire was still raining down, but now I was staring at an absolute horror of a creature as it cocked its head in a nearly feline curiosity. It looked almost skeletal, like a Halloween decoration that moved a little too well. As I watched it, it scuttled a little closer, stalking my point of view. Its eye sockets were bare, I thought, but the closer it got, the better I could see a pair of bright yellow pinpricks in the depths of those cavernous sockets. Its ink-black tongue would flick out every now and again, so it could moisten its seemingly bony lips. It was skulking in on 6 strangely jointed legs, and it reminded me of Toothless from the How to Train Your Dragon movies. Well, Toothless's skeleton, at least. It cocked its head as it towered over me, but when it opened its mouth, I felt another scream break through my sleeping lips. Its mouth was like a garbage disposal full of teeth, 2 sets spinning in a circular buzzsaw pattern as it hissed and screamed at me. The screams could have broken glass, and my ears actually started bleeding as it screeched over me. The head snapped down, strange teeth covering my point of view, and I woke up to 2 orderlies restraining me. That's when someone stuck a needle in my neck, and I was left in a mercifully dreamless sleep. But dreams, it seems, were the least of my worries that night. I was treated to that same sky, that same damn amber sky, until the drugs wore off. In that time, I saw those lumbering giants make their way across the blasted land. I saw human beings, too, as they made their way across the blasted land, some of them trampled by the lumbering behemoths, or hunted and maimed by those skeletal horrors. Little burnt tan creatures, almost like frogs that had learned how to walk, capered about, shoving and kicking at the naked, stumbling humans that walked about confusedly. Their skin was seared, their bodies bleeding, but no matter what happened to them, they just kept screaming and writhing in endless pain. The vision went on, an endless hell that I was forced to watch as the world on the other side moved on. I don't know if it was heaven or hell, but the only thing that remained the same was the crimson sky and the burning rain. The rest of that day, I was kept in a medical-induced state, living in that hell and seeing its atrocities. In that time, it felt as though I slept for years. Time had no meaning in that place, and the lumbering beasts became a sort of rude clock for me. They would lumber by periodically, and I would mark that as an hour. Their footsteps would shake the ground, making my peripheral shudder, and my vision felt like ripples on a pond. Of the strange skeletal creatures, there was very little to see after the first one. None of them approached me again. The mosquito creatures kept their distance as well. I suppose they hadn't found me particularly tasty, so they were content to leave me alone. That was until one of the little brown creatures came to investigate. I'd been staring at that amber sky for 2 passes of the lumbering beasts when a face that only a mother could love swam up out of the void. It was so sudden that I yelped internally, not really sure what to do now that something living had come close again. Nothing had come to bother me for so long that I had begun to think my position was going to remain this dull little space until I eventually came out of this state. The ugly, lumpy creature bent down, bringing its face very close to my position, before wrapping a hand around me and bathing me in far too welcoming darkness. Light peeked through the fingers as we ran, but that seemed to be the point where the drugs were beginning to wear off, and I started to come out. I squinted my remaining eye at the heavy rays of the afternoon sun, and felt my stomach rumble at the tray that sat before me. When the nurse came in, smiling, as she watched me eat, I asked her how long I had been out for. I expected it to be a week, maybe a month, but she told me it had been about 12 hours. It felt as though I had spent years in that terrible place, counted out days' worth of hours by the passing of the creatures, and I felt that I never wanted to go back there again. I wasn't sure if it was the act of sleeping or just the act of closing my eyes, but I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself from sleep. That wasn't particularly hard. I had been asleep for 12 straight hours. But as the night wound on, that feeling of heavy eyelids became harder and harder to ignore. The TV shows became a little less stimulating, the bed became a little more comfortable, and my head began to dip and slide towards my chest. They wouldn't let me have any coffee for some reason, no stimulants at all, and the water was cutting it not at all. I made it till just after sunrise, somehow, but as I slipped into unconsciousness, I was greeted with something worse than I could have ever imagined. As I slipped off, I was treated to the worst vision yet. I was sitting high up now, in a throne room straight from the mind of Wes Craven. When they speak of otherworldly geometry and Lovecraft, I have to believe they've seen this place. Nothing was equal, nothing congruent. The angles hurt to look at, the edges were like razor blades, and the building was either made by a madman or someone who was driven mad by its construction. When you read this, you won't understand, but I ask you to try. The room looked like it was designed to inspire anxiety, foster nightmares, put the inhabitants on edge until madness swallowed them whole. The whole room was a dirty white. It wasn't off-white. It wasn't a dark white. It was a filthy white. I had seen the way windows look when they're caked with mud, and that was this color. It made my skin crawl, or it would have if I'd had any skin at that moment. The color was throughout. The feeling it gave me, coupled with the anxiety from the construction I was now inside of, made me want to shudder and vomit at the same time. It was filled with pews, which were piled with the muddy frog creatures I'd seen before. They were all manner of sizes, their lumpy bodies pressed into those seats as they sat there in rapture of me, it seemed. They were dressed strangely in garments I can only describe as fancy rags, and as I watched, the show began. A line of naked, screaming people were dragged forward, unclothed brown creatures prodding them with sticks as they looked at me in horror. These people were in terrible shape. The best among them were bruised and dirty, but some of them were lucky to be standing. I could see bodies burned down to the white meat, bones poking from them, eyes and limbs missing. But the most horrifying part was how these injuries didn't seem to bother them. They were filthy and afraid, but I got the feeling that their injuries were secondary in their mind. As the first one was pushed towards me, the brown creature opened its mouth and spoke with a voice like a well filled with water. "We have rounded up these cattle for punishment, my lord." I was confused as the dark-haired man who was roughly my age stumbled forward, but I wouldn't have long to revel in that lack of knowledge. "Who dares to trespass within my realm?" I heard it and turned, though I had no body. I was held aloft on a pedestal, and the creature beside me seemed to be my captor. It was beyond all earthly description, but I will try. Imagine one of those Jim Henson Skeksis had all the skin burned off of it, down to the bone, and then had the flesh reapplied badly with red and brown Play-Doh. Its eyes were piss-yellow slits. Its jaws were beak-like and sharp-looking, and its flesh appeared to be oozing as it spoke in a thick, deep voice like a frog at the bottom of a ravine. It spoke to the brown creatures, telling them how they wanted the people tortured, and then, suddenly, it noticed me. Turning its head, it smiled as it saw me looking at it, and its pleasure was even worse than its anger somehow. "See what awaits you, human. Witness and despair." It croakingly hissed out these words at me. I came awake, screaming again, and thankfully, they didn't put me under this time. I've been in the restraints for 4 days now. They transferred me to a psychiatric ward, and the straps were to stop me from digging at my skin. I've been awake for 4 days, refusing to go to sleep because every time I nod off, I'm returned to that hateful place. I gaze upon that creature as he passes judgment, never sleeping, never leaving, and I wake up screaming. I've begged my doctors not to sedate me, but I think they will before long. I'm writing this under heavy supervision, trying to explain to my doctors since words seem to have failed me. I'm hoping he understands that, despite my state, I don't want to hurt myself. I've seen what lies beyond, and it's not something I'm in any hurry to get to. Good evening, my little creeperonis. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's reading. Oh, it's that time again. Time to thank our patrons. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. Couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to join Leslie in our Spooky Skeleton tier, come on down to Patreon and become a patron. We have several fun tiers that you might enjoy. Or just come back and listen every week. We do love an audience. And as always, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back very soon with more cozy horror. With me, Dr. Plague. Until then, I'd like to wish all of you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.